Keith, how are you doing right now?
I'm doing pretty good. It's, things are hectic. It's a little bit more hectic than even normal for a county commissioner with COVID-19 and everything going on. You have to be able to be flexible and, doing a lot of Zoom meetings. Zoom meetings have their own unique category of fatigue. It seems like it would be less stressful, but somehow at the end of a long day when there's lots of Zoom meetings, I'm just very tired. And it's a whole different category of tired. It's not like tired after you've worked physically very hard or gone for a long run or something like that. It's just a kind of a different kind of fatigue. I guess it's just sitting in front of the computer screen, and you have to be attentive. It's a lot like driving in a snowstorm or something. You have to be so focused if you're really going to be productive and be an important part of it. So that's very draining. But, we're taking care of ourselves. My wife, Evelyn, takes good care of me and makes sure that I'm getting adequate rest and everything. So it's challenging everything. I'm using all the tools in the toolbox between communications and writing and time management and all those sorts of things. It's really a challenge, but it's a challenge that I enjoy doing.
Have you been doing any COVID projects like building a deck or installing a closet system or rebuilding a car or anything like that?
No, I haven't had any time for these COVID projects I keep hearing about. I haven't built a sailboat in the basement. First, we don't have a basement, but I haven't built a sailboat in the basement only to discover I couldn't get it out or anything like that. But I really haven't done anything and haven't, if there's anything that I've taken up in a big way that I wasn't doing before, I've been listening to even more podcasts than I listen to. I listen to a lot of interviews, a lot of management, a lot of business podcasts, and I also listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. I guess if I have a guilty pleasure, it's true crime, and I listen to a fair number of podcasts that do deal with the music industry. I'm a big consumer of culture. That's one way that I stay in touch with younger people and stay in touch with what's going on. Is I'm a voracious consumer of culture, primarily through music, and I'll pay attention to what's going on in the music industry, not only just the music but as a business, and the P&Ls and the dollars and cents of the music industry. It just kind of fascinates me.
You're also quite a health and fitness enthusiast. Are you able to get out and exercise and take care of yourself during this time?
Yeah, I've been able to get out and work out, and we have a small home gym. We've got a weight bench and some other things, so I use that. We have a Nordic track, which I use sometimes. That's the extent of my workout, even if it's a good, nice day for weather. My schedule and my work routine is just such that I can't get out. So we'll do the Nordic track, turn on the afternoon and evening news and watch the news and do the time on the Nordic track. But I really enjoy getting out, going for a run, going for a bike ride, rollerblading, any of those sorts of things, so that you get the vitamin D and you get the fresh air and all that stuff too. And I realized a long time ago that I was not a gifted natural athlete, but I could be fit. And so I decided that fit was what I'd be. So I've just got used to working out and running. And I was telling my mom, my mom and I usually text back and forth a couple of times every day. And I'd been out for a run a few hours ago, and I got a text from her. She asked me how I was doing, and I said I was just back in for a run. And I've been running more days than not for 53 years, and it's just something that I really enjoy. And fortunately, the knees and the hips and the ankles and everything have held up, and as long as I can keep running, that kind of keeps my blood pressure down and keeps me on an even keel, and I really do enjoy it. Yeah, so it helps out a lot, staying fit.
So speaking of your family, let's reach back a little bit. Where did you grow up, and what did your dad do for a living? Do you have any siblings? Did your mom work outside of the home?
Yeah, okay. I grew up in a little country community called Wax, Georgia, and there was a crossroads there. And at that time, it wasn't a four-way stop. Now it's a four-way stop, and it has been for probably, 25 years, and there's still people complaining about it being a four-way stop. But there was one of the directions had a stop sign, but there's a little country store there at the corner. And back in those days, there were country stores all out across the country, and there were still a lot of active farms out there then. But I grew up there in that country community, and every house that I lived in before I went to college was within 200-300 yards of each other. When my parents brought me home, they brought me home to a little duplex that they lived in, and then we moved into another small house. And then my dad used his GI Bill allowance to build the house that my parents still lived in. So they've been there about 60 years now in that house. But that little country community of Wax, Georgia, was about 8 miles away from the nearest town, Rome, Georgia, which was the county seat. And so that's where I grew up, out in the country in a rural area. It had been a very agrarian area, cotton and what we called truck crops like subsistence farming, tomatoes and vegetables, okra, corn, what have you. And they grew a lot of cotton back at one time or another. And my dad's parents owned their own farm. It was about 95 acres, nothing huge. But my dad talks about when he was a kid, he was still plowing behind a mule. And sometimes the mules would run off and everything. And he has some funny stories about tracking the mules down and catching them. But around the turn of the century, the 1900s, from the 1800s to the 1900s, a lot of the cotton mills from the north started moving south. And so there was Massachusetts Mill Company built a cotton mill near where I grew up. And there were cotton mills all up and down that area there because there were rivers. And so the water was pretty cheap and the labor was cheaper, made it attractive for them to move the mills down there. And then both sides of the family started getting into the cotton milling business. And so they worked in the cotton mills, what people around there would call lint heads. We kind of chuckle at that. It's kind of a badge of honor and a badge of pride now. But my dad worked in the cotton mill after he came back from the Army. He was in the Army during the Korea conflict. And he went to a business school on the GI Bill and was able to work into a blue-collar management type position. But we were always, hourly workers for the most part. And I had a sister who had severe birth defects, and she lived to be 14, and she got pneumonia in September of 1966. She was 14 and I was 10, and she passed away. So when she died, after a couple of years, my mom went to a vocational technical school there in our area and became an LPN, a licensed practical nurse. So then she worked for years as an LPN before she retired. So that's what my parents did. My dad worked in the cotton mill, and my mom worked she worked in two hospitals. She retired from one, the public hospital, and then went to work in a private hospital and was able to retire from there too. And then I eventually worked in that cotton mill. I think we can talk about that a little bit later, I guess.
And you were a kid growing up in the South during the Civil Rights era. How did that affect you?
Oh, that's a good question. I was about, I want to say I was about 8 or so when I really became aware of a lot of things that were going on in the civil rights movement. And I say aware, I mean, I didn't just hear about them. I was able to kind of think about them and assimilate some of the things that were going on. And I remember, John Lewis just died back in the summer. And I remember the Sunday of the Civil Rights March when they were leaving Selma, and there were the events there at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. I really remember that because we were watching TV on a Sunday afternoon, and CBS News cut away to do a special report, and they were there at the Selma Bridge, and the marchers came across the bridge, and then there was the confrontation there, and I just didn't quite understand what was going on. It didn't quite make any sense to me. And like a lot of kids that grew up in the South, I could say, well, our neighbors had a African American housekeeper, so I was always around African Americans. Well, yes, I was, but it wasn't like we were an integrated society. We weren't. We were a segregated society. So I didn't fully understand, but I was young enough not to have a lot of things so deeply ingrained in me that any of that really seemed normal. And so the schools, our local schools, were desegregated when I was in fifth grade, which would have been the academic year of 1966, 67. So just a couple of years later, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and those big events. Kids being kids, there were some of the local schools had these modular classrooms outside, and I'm like, wow, we all thought, we wish we could have some of those modular classrooms. Those are pretty cool. But we didn't understand why they were there. And the reason that they were there is because these schools, our schools, the white schools, were going to have a sudden influx of students that they hadn't had before. So the classes were going to either get bigger or they're going to have more class, thus the modular classrooms. There was a bond issue that had to be passed, which financed a lot of school expansion, hiring more teachers. That was a big controversial thing. I didn't truly understand that at the time. I thought it was just a question of whether or not people wanted their taxes to go up. But, it had a lot more, there were a lot more things going on with it than that. But then in, like I said, the academic year of 66, 67, when I was in fifth grade, was when the black students started going to school with us. And, there were, I think a lot of the teachers were more concerned about it than us because we were just kids. We didn't really know or care or understand that much. And I think some of the parents were somewhat concerned. But everything went smoothly. One of the good things about where I grew up, two of the major industries were really education and medicine. We had a regional hospital there. Like I mentioned, my mom worked in a hospital. We had a lot of doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers there. And education was a pretty big industry there. So generally speaking, compared to a lot of towns in the South, we were pretty open that way. And so there wasn't a lot of fear and trepidation or angst or what have you. So I came along probably right at a good age for that. I wasn't old enough to be set in my ways, but I was old enough to assimilate what was going on and try to have some understanding of it and move on from there. And I'm sure, we could talk about this for quite some time because it did affect me just like it affected everybody. But then, and I think back at it, there were times that we went through that appeared to be really promising that a new society in the New South and all these things were going to evolve. I always think about the Allman Brothers Band. A lot of us, I know I did, and I think a lot of my peer group took a great deal of pride that they were an integrated band. And, that was really something that we could take a great deal of pride in, to show the world that not only were we weren't like the old ways. We were taking a more positive outlook on things, and we were working together and trying to assimilate and try to really fulfill this vision that we heard about the New South.
And did you go to Vietnam?
No. I used to say I was too young to go to Vietnam, and then I thought about, well, that sounds like I really wanted to go. But I'll be honest, I did not want to go. By the time I was 12 or so, 1968, by the time that just about everybody had figured it out, even middle-aged people that you would think of would have been very pro-war, pro-Vietnam, were saying things like, hey, if we're not really trying to win this thing, or if it's not winnable, then we need to get out of there because we're just we're just wasting our young people's lives over there. I was about 12, and so, at that time, we played Army a lot. We played soldier a lot. But I was young enough that I really wasn't ever worried that I was going to get drafted or get called to go to Vietnam. I knew a lot of guys who did. The neighbor girl that I grew up next door to, her fiance at that time was in Vietnam. I have a lot of cousins and friends and others that were, if they weren't in Vietnam, they were in Thailand or Laos or somewhere adjacent there doing something, and friends that were in the Navy off the coast. I've got a brother-in-law who was in Vietnam in the Delta. I've got good friends here who were in Vietnam, and but they're all a little bit older than me. And we stopped sending combat troops in 1971. I had a lottery number, but the draft was already over by then, and all the combat troops were out by 73. I graduated from high school in 74, and then of course in 75 was when South Vietnam fell. So I never had to really worry about going or getting drafted to go to Vietnam, but it certainly affected me, and it affected my outlook on national security, on patriotism, on all those sorts of things, and it really, it boils down to a soldier, a sailor, a Marine, an airman. Their lives are very precious, and they are so precious they shouldn't be wasted on something that isn't worth doing, and it isn't something that the American people are truly committed to, and that we're going to do our best to win it at the least human cost, at the least expense. It's kind of like the Powell Doctrine. We have to know that the people support it, that the people are behind it, that it truly is a serious national interest that we're committing ourselves to, and we're going to do it as quickly and as efficiently and as effectively as we possibly can, and then we're going to get everybody home as quickly as we can.
Vietnam was a hard war for America, and it was an unpopular war, but you decided anyway to join the Navy just a few years after that. When was that?
I went in the Navy in 78, and I'd kind of always wanted to, it's like thinking about starting school. Around the time I started school was when we started the manned space flights, Project Mercury, and my mom got me up early one morning to show me, to let me watch this astronaut getting into a space capsule, and then they launched him up into space. And I want to say that was Alan Shepard, who was the first American in space. It was a very short flight. It was a suborbital flight, just kind of lobbed him up into space and came back down, didn't orbit the Earth. But I was absolutely captivated by that. And from then on, I don't know from that moment, but it wasn't long after that that I wanted to be a Navy pilot. And part of the reason was that 4 of the original 7 astronauts were Navy. I'd had my mom's brothers, just about all of them had been in the Navy. My dad's side of the family had all been in the Army. So kind of my joke was, I don't know why I didn't wind up splitting the difference and becoming a Marine. John Glenn was a Marine, but Marine pilots are naval aviators. Probably more information than anybody wants to know about that, but that's the case. But I just wanted to be a Navy pilot forever. And so even when we go to an amusement park, I'd ride all the rides that, that were kind of like astronaut training rides, like they'd spin you around, turn you upside down and all that stuff. I just really loved that. And that was what I wanted to be all the way through school. I took science and math and everything very seriously because I either wanted to go to Georgia Tech and study aero or go to the Naval Academy and be a Navy pilot. And then 73 or so, late high school, the space program stopped or it wound down, and the viability and the dream of being a Navy pilot wasn't quite as tangible as it had been. And I fell under the spell of one of my high school teachers, an English teacher, who realized that I had a pretty good ability to write. And somehow or another, I got distracted and decided I wanted to become a lawyer. So I got into pre-law and everything, and I was doing pretty well in college on a pre-law track. And then somewhere in between my junior and senior year of college, I was home that summer working in the cotton mill for my summer job. And I got home, and I was my room. I'd flown model rockets. I'd done all that stuff. I had all the model kits with all the spacecraft, Navy fighters and everything. They were all over my room. And I was sitting there one afternoon, and I just started looking at those things, and I started thinking, that is really what I really want to do. And I called the recruiting office, and there was a lot about that process I didn't understand. And I asked what I needed to do to be a Navy pilot, and they said, well, you have to take a test and do all this stuff. And so I started down that track, and I was accepted for it. But when I learned, and this is really, it's kind of separate, but it's equally important, I didn't truly understand that the Navy recruits you to be an officer, and then you specialize in something. You either become a pilot, or you become a ship driver, you become a submariner, you become a supply officer, you become a something or another. But as far as the Navy is concerned, first and foremost, you're an officer. And that involves leading your sailors, taking care of your sailors, managing your department in a ship or a squadron, any of those sorts of things. But when I started learning about that, and I started thinking about the Vietnam experience that I'd seen my older friends and cousins and such go through, and thinking about the way that war had been somewhat mismanaged. And it wasn't anything to do with the troops. It wasn't anything really to do, with the soldiers there. It was, there was just a lot of things that were done that gave them an impossible task. So in no way am I ever demeaning anybody that was in Vietnam. They were, I guess they were maybe overreaching to say they were victims, but the war just was not led and managed properly, and most of that was at the higher levels of government where those mistakes were made. But what I learned about being an officer was part of the reason I wanted to do that was to try to keep something like that from ever happening again. To try to be in a position. There's a movie called Gardens of Stone, and James Earl Jones and James Caan portray these senior NCOs. And part of the thing that those characters in the movie are trying to do is protect these young soldiers from A, having to go to Vietnam, but B, if they go, to give them the skills they need to survive and live and come back home. And that was kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to try to be in a position to prevent that sort of thing from ever happening again. And that was how I came to grips with it. I really wanted to be a Navy pilot, but then when I learned about you're not just a pilot, you're an officer, well, then, okay, what am I going to do with that? What am I going to do with that role? And that's how I wound up going into the Navy.
So let's just pick up the pace a little bit. You're married, marriages, children? Where are they? Are they married? Do you have grandkids?
Yes, I'm married. I have a lovely wife, Evelyn. We met when I was in Washington on one of my final tours in the Navy. And she worked for a defense contractor, and she made her way to Colorado Springs. We had similar interests. So I had been married before, had 2 daughters. One will be 35 pretty soon. The other one is 30. The older one is married, has a stepson. So I have a step-grandchild. And the younger one is not married, but she has her partner, and she and he live in Birmingham, Alabama. The older daughter still lives down in Georgia, and the younger one doesn't have any children. But yeah, they're both really well-adjusted young adults, fine young ladies, and I'm really proud of both of them. We're really proud of both of them.
And how about any hobbies? Do you have any hobbies? You said music is really important to you. Do you play any instruments or?
I play the stereo. I play my iPod or iPhone now. I had an iPod, but no, I've tried several times to play guitar, and I've got short little flat tip fingers, and it's just an exercise in futility to do that. But maybe if I'd have started when I was younger and had some lessons and everything when I was 6 or 7 years old, it might have worked. But every now and then I'll pick it up and try to play. But I really do have a passion for music, and kind of a musicologist, I guess, in some respects. I can tell you, who played on what album, who produced it, who the engineer was, who wrote what songs, and that sort of stuff, because it's kind of my passion that way. And it doesn't really matter what genre. I love it. I love music.
So how about live shows?
Yeah.
Obviously, before COVID happened, we had a lot of them here in town. Do you go to concerts?
Yeah. We went to the Lariat a lot for live music. We went down to the beach a lot for live music. We go to Red Rocks. It's a tremendous thing to have here. I have, friends that live in other parts of the country, and they're all like, someday I got to go to Red Rocks. And I say, yes, you do. Someday you have to go to Red Rocks. But for us, it's a 2-hour drive. We go down there. We've been to shows to Pepsi Center and Fiddler's Green, Paramount, other venues in Denver. We're really lucky. Denver had and will have again a great music scene. That's one of the things that attracted me to Colorado back high school and college. That was when the Caribou Ranch recording studio in Nederland was going great guns, and you'd pick up these albums and you'd see them recorded at Caribou Ranch in Nederland, Colorado. The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band was here. Poco was here. Stephen Stills lived in Gold Hill up above Boulder. A bunch of those guys lived here. Joe Walsh lived here. Dan Fogelberg. John Denver, of course. Any number of those. And that was, a large part of what was drawing me to Colorado was the music scene for Colorado. And even though Caribou Ranch isn't there anymore, and most of the musicians that lived here have gone, there's still a very vibrant music scene in Denver, and it's a stop on every artist tour. We see Jackson Browne every opportunity. We've seen so many different people that it really is enjoyable, and we're hopeful that someday BV and Salida will be back on their top step of the regional circuit, and we'll have more live shows. I love live music. It helps keep live musicians performing and keep them at work. I remember back in the disco days, I was watching a live concert. There were some shows. ABC had one called Fridays. And then, of course, there was Saturday Night Live, which is still being broadcast at times. It isn't quite what it was back then. But one night on Fridays, there was a musician named Bob Welch who had been in Fleetwood Mac. And just before he started his final number, he said, "Y'all go out and hear some live music this weekend. It'll make you feel better." And I knew what he was saying. He was saying keep working musicians at work and keep the PA people at work, keep the people in the clubs at work, because just listening to recorded music in a disco, it doesn't have the same soul. You like that old-time rock and roll, like Bob Seger said.
So music brought you to Colorado, but what brought you to Chaffee County, and specifically what brought you to BV?
After I got out of the Navy, I was able to, on my last tour, watch what was going on and how people, and then I said my wife, Evelyn, who was then my fiance, worked for a defense contractor, and it isn't quite as simple as you work for, say, Lockheed Martin, or you work for TRW, or you work for Northrop Grumman. You're actually working for a contract. And a lot of times those contracts get picked up by a different company. And if they get picked up by a different company, you, in effect, lose your job and you have to get rehired. And it's like, well, you didn't do anything wrong. You're still working on the same project, but the contract for that project changes companies. And that was just something I did not want to have to do. So, and I didn't really want to be in that military-industrial complex part of national security or defense. If I could have been in, the academic world, a think tank, or been a professor or something studying national security policy and strategy, that wouldn't have been so bad. But project management and weapon system procurement, those sorts of things really didn't have a big draw for me. So when I got out, part of the reason that we came to Colorado was we both enjoyed the outdoor lifestyle, skiing, mountain biking, cycling, rock climbing, anything like that. The whole outside magazine experience. And so I wanted to get into that business. I got a job with a store called Grand West Outfitters in Colorado Springs, which was started by the Chikowitz family that started Noah's Ark. And they had sold it by then, but I got a job there managing Grand West Outfitters. And after a couple of years, the people that owned Grand West Outfitters decided to get out of that business, focus on alpine skiing and big box bicycle shops. And I wanted to stay in the business and found out the Trailhead was available. I'd been in it a time or two when I'd been up here ice climbing or something, and discussed it with my wife. And Evelyn and I had already talked about moving on up into the mountains somewhere, and it just seemed to all flow together. So we bought the Trailhead and moved to BV.
What was it like having a retail business here?
It was a lot of fun. I got into it for the equipment and for the passion of the activities, all those sorts of things. But what I really enjoyed about it, looking back on it, was the people and working with customers and helping them out with their questions and their needs. Because it takes a lot of courage for somebody to walk into a specialty outdoor shop. And for all they know, it's the kind of outdoor shop that sells equipment to people that are going to go climb Mount Everest. And we did sell equipment to people that were going to go climb K2 and mountains like that. But for the most part, it's people that just want to take up hiking, that want to go hike the Colorado Trail or go up to Harvard Lakes or go up to Cronky Lake or go to Interlaken. And sometimes it's because they've had a health problem or they've had a health challenge, and the doc says you got to get some exercise or you're going to drop dead within a few years. And it takes a great deal of courage for somebody like that to walk into an outdoor specialty shop and say, I'm throwing myself on your mercies here. Don't take advantage of me, but sell me what I need and nothing more. Sell me what I am really going to enjoy and nothing more. And then, maybe you'll have a customer for life that way. So really what I most enjoyed was the people. And I've said it time and time again that I got into it for the equipment. I got into it about the activities. But what I really enjoyed was the people. And I don't see how anybody could enjoy being in any retail business. If it's shoes, if it's clothing, if it's appliances, if it's outdoor gear, if it's bicycles, what have you. I don't understand how anybody could truly enjoy being in retail if they're not a people person. You just have to me, love people. And it's the same thing with being a county commissioner. I don't see how you could really enjoy it if you don't enjoy people, because ultimately it's a people business. Yeah, you're trying to resolve neighbor disputes and work on ditches and the budget and roads and bridges and everything, but all those things, all those programs are for the benefit of people. And if you're not helping people, then, that's really what it's all about. Even going back to being a Navy officer, it's what's your primary concern? Your primary concern is your people. You take care of your people, they'll take care of everything else.
So is that why you decided to get into public service and civil life here in BV?
It has a lot to do with it. I kind of, I was not intending to do it, but I just kind of, I don't know, I attract these people or something. It wasn't very long that we were living in BV that people started approaching me about running for the town council or other things, school board. And I just was not going to come in like a bull in a china shop, because where I had grown up, I'd seen people move into town, and as soon as they got there, they were like, I'm going to run for the county commission, or I'm going to run for the school board because I have all the answers. I'm the smartest person in the room, and it's just very off-putting. That's not my style. So I had told somebody, Judy Hassel was the executive director of the chamber at that time, and she had talked to me about asking me if I wanted to be involved in civic life. And I said, I do, but I want to, at my own pace, in my own time, on my own schedule. I just want to see what's going on. And it's like playing a game of pickup basketball. You stand there, and then after the first game's over, who's got next, and you kind of shape up who's who and who you want on your team. I called it the on-ramp approach. It's like if you're doing it right and you start coming down the on-ramp to get on the highway, and you look down and you see what the pace of traffic is, and you find a spot for you to fit in, and then you match your pace and you match your speed with the other cars on the highway, and then you merge in and you're just part of the flow, and you're not impeding traffic, you're not holding things up, and you're going at a pace that actually helps traffic flow along. That was the way I looked at it. And, we have seen people come into the county. I'm not going to name any names, not going to give any specific examples, but I can think of at least 4 that have come in, and they were going to do great things. They were going to go great guns, and they either wound up leaving some people holding the bag, or they didn't fulfill their promises, or they weren't what they said they were, and they wound up leaving town. And I wanted to have time to establish some trust, establish bonds with the community, let people know who I was, and let me learn more about the community and what the community is all about, who the members of the community are, and so that we could have that bond of trust and really know what's going on. And so I didn't come in like somebody trying to change everything and think I had the answers and I was going to solve every problem. First place, we don't have a lot of problems here. We're blessed that way. And the ones that we do have, they don't need a complete rewrite. We just need some minor adjustments here and there, and you can be far more effective that way by working with people in a collaborative manner than coming in and just trying to bulldoze your way through things. So, and then back to kind of answering your original question there, after a few months, Judy Hassel and a member of the county commission at that time said there were going to be some openings on the Chaffee County Visitors Bureau, and that might be a good place for me to start getting involved, owning an outdoor business and an outdoor shop, which is pretty heavily dependent on the tourism economy and so forth. So I did volunteer for the Visitors Bureau, got involved with that, and it wasn't very long that I was chosen to be the chairman of it. So I did 3 years on there, and that was very helpful. And then at the end of that 3 years, there were some seats open on the BV Town Council, and that was when I decided to seek an elected position. I felt like after 3 years of the kind of involvement I was doing with the Visitors Bureau and owning a shop and being involved in the community to the extent we were, going to church here and doing lots of other things, I thought that it wasn't too big a leap to run for town council. So I did.
You were also the executive director of Friends of Brown Canyon. How did that come about?
Well, I've always been one of the things that kind of was a natural relationship between the outdoor business and public lands and environmentalism. And so I had kind of been on the periphery of the Browns Canyon effort for a number of years, but I'd never been as involved as I wanted to be. So around the fall of 2012, or summer of 2012, I was invited to go to Washington on a lobbying trip with Friends of Browns Canyon. And at that time, the effort to have it declared Browns Canyon Wilderness had morphed into Browns Canyon National Monument. So I went back on a lobbying trip, and I'd served in Washington with a joint staff and done a lot of work there with policy coordination and interagency collaboration. So I think some of the members of the Friends of Browns Canyon Board of Directors had identified me as a potential executive director to help them with the final push to get it designated as a national monument. And some of the other organizations, a part of the grassroots coalition, like the Conservation Lands Foundation, the Wilderness Society, and others, honestly, looking back on it, I think I was kind of being tested or auditioning for the role of executive director on that summer trip of 2012. And then in the fall, they offered me that position. And we we, being Evelyn and I, both knew that we were probably going to be selling the trailhead in a few months. And once again, things just kind of flowed together, and the planets aligned, the stars aligned, and I became executive director of Friends of Browns Canyon. We still owned the trailhead, and I was doing that job for about 6 months, and then we sold the trailhead, and I was the full-time executive director of Friends of Browns Canyon. Well, it was a part-time job, but it was a full-time effort. Sometimes people understand that part-time jobs become a full-time effort. And so I did that for about another almost 2 years. And then when I was elected to county commission, I resigned from that position because I didn't want to be executive director of Friends of Browns Canyon and a county commissioner for a variety of reasons. But number one, I wanted to be a full-time county commissioner. That was a commitment I made, and that was a commitment I wasn't going to go back on. I wasn't going to say, well, now that I'm elected, I've decided I'm going to still be the Friends of Browns Canyon executive director. Now, I'd made that commitment, and I stuck with it.
There are a lot of myths associated with Browns Canyon National Monument. Do you care to comment on any of those?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there are a lot. There's one of the big ones is that, several of the ones that you can't hunt in there anymore. Of course, you can still hunt there. One is that there's no grazing permits in Browns Canyon National Monument anymore. Those are still there, and that's something we worked very hard to preserve because a lot of our ranchers depend on the grazing allotments in Browns Canyon to graze their cattle during summertime so they can grow hay in their pastures during the summer, cut the hay, put it up, have hay for the wintertime, and then bring their cattle back down and keep them on their pastures during winter and feed them the hay. So, and those are just long-standing, time-honored commitments. They're part of the fabric of the West. They're part of the fabric of an agricultural community. So we did not want to see those taken away. So we worked hard to make sure that they were maintained in the proclamation. And we worked hard to try to reassure the ranchers that they were going to be maintained in there. I'd say that's the big one. I have that one come up all the time. People will often say, well, now the ranchers can't graze their cattle in Browns Canyon National Monument, but the fact is they can. And I don't see those grazing privileges ever being withdrawn. I don't see it as a wise managerial move, and I don't see it as a wise political move on anybody's part at the Forest Service or BLM or anywhere. And it's the kind of thing that if they tried to do it, as there were some discussion about restricting some grazing allotments in the county when the Eastern Colorado Resource Management Plan update was going through, I pushed against that very hard because I know those grazing allotments are a requirement for viability for a ranching operation here in the county. So we'll keep pushing for those. Another one, and this one's a very nuanced one. I'm almost reluctant to bring it up, but it comes up enough that I should. And that's about the river. The river itself, i.e. the water, is not in the National Monument. The National Monument has parcels on each side of the river. Therefore, the river bed, the river bottom, is in the National Monument, but the river itself is not in the National Monument. And that was in order to preserve all the water rights, all the water regulations, all the water privileges, and all the water management practices that were in place. And that was something that the Upper Ark was concerned about, something that a lot of people were concerned about. So we made sure that the river itself is not in the National Monument. So those are probably the big ones there about hunting, about grazing, and about the river. And there are a few others.
And you left that job before you were sworn in as a county commissioner. Lots of county commissioners and other public servants have jobs while they're serving as a commissioner. Why did you leave that job?
Well, again, I wanted to be a full-time county commissioner, and I'm certainly glad that I made that commitment because the job is so big now that I don't see how anybody could have multiple jobs and be a county commissioner. I'm not casting aspersions on anyone who came before me because that was before now. But I see what other people are undergoing, and personally, that's a level of stress that I probably wouldn't deal with well if I had another job and being county commissioner. I don't want to imply that anybody's doing less than a full effort and less than an outstanding job at either thing, but for me, I just need to be able to focus on one thing, and being a county commissioner is a big enough job, and if I do it right and work hard enough at it and pay attention to everything I should be paying attention to, it takes plenty of my time.
And what made you want to become one?
Well, it kind of goes back to being on those trips to Washington and just seeing how much differently a county commissioner was received and treated in a representative's office, in a senator's office, and in an administration office. It seemed to me that being a county commissioner is really a level where you can really make an impact. And when we would go in to talk about Browns Canyon, quite often the first question out of anybody's mouth is, where are the commissioners on this? What does the county commission have to say about this? And it became very clear to me, if the county commissioners weren't on board, or if the county commissioners were stridently opposed to it, it probably wasn't going to happen. And we had 2 out of 3 who supported it, and the third was not outwardly opposed, but he had an official position of a non-committal position. But even at that, even with 2 out of 3 supporting it, sometimes that was the sole focus. Is like, well, why don't you have 100% backing from the county commission? And it's like, we got the whole business community, we got the whole outdoors community, we've got the vast majority of people in the county want to see this happen. 2 out of the 3 county commissioners want it to happen, and the focus would be on that third county commissioner. So seeing how that happened and seeing the impact that you could have and the way that you could really work on meaningful problems and get some things done, and the fact that people had approached me and asked me about doing it, that there was some interest there, that was what made me seriously consider it. And I started looking at the job, looking at what all was entailed, looked at the time commitment, and I said, yeah, this is something that not only am I willing to do it, I think I'd really enjoy it, and I think I'd be good at it. I've got the skill sets from my previous experience as a Navy officer, from my interagency policy coordination experience in Washington, and from working with people, and the Browns Canyon Executive Director experience, working with the public land management agencies and working with the advocacy groups. And I said, yeah, this is something that I think I'd do a good job at, and it's something that I'm very interested in doing, because I think it's a good position to really make some differences in people's lives for the betterment of the entire community.
And have you enjoyed serving Chaffee County as a commissioner?
Yes, I have, very much. I enjoy it every day, and there's some days better than others, and there's some days at the end of the day I'm like, why am I doing this? But, on balance, I'm not a huge believer in a daily balance. I try to live a balanced life on a daily basis, but if I don't get to work out, or if I don't get to listen to music, if I don't get to do something every day, well, I can live with that. I look at a life balance, and over the course of your life, are things balanced? And over the course of this commissioner term, my first term, I've been able to, even with COVID and the restrictions and constraints we're laboring under now, live an overall balanced life. So yes, I've enjoyed it, and I think we've done some really meaningful things. If I didn't think we were doing meaningful things, then I wouldn't be enjoying it. And it doesn't matter about the hours. It doesn't matter about the level of effort that you're having to put into it. Sometimes it gets frustrating when you hear people say things that you know are just flat out untrue, and you get disappointed in people when you think you had a good relationship with them, and then things get back to you. But overall, it's very rewarding, and I think I've said it before. I'm going to say it again, that I can't think of any other elected position in the United States that compares with being a county commissioner in a small, rural, growing county. A much bigger county, The problems are different, the challenges are different, and the work is different. But in a county like ours, this is the peak. There's no higher calling for me. I've heard people say, well, you should run for the state house, or you should run for the state senate, or you should run for something else. And it's like, I have no interest in doing that, because this to me is the peak. If you go over the peak, you're headed back downhill. Being a county commissioner in a western rural county is really, for me, what it's all about.
And so now you're campaigning for a second term.
Yep.
How is this campaign different from when it was in 2016?
Well, in 2016, I was pretty much a full-time candidate because I had my term on the BV Town Board had expired in April of 2016, but we had sold the trailhead in May of 2013, so I had a good bit of time to start going to all the business after-hours events I could, get involved in service clubs to a greater level than I had been before, and really start getting out and mingling with people and listening to them and asking them questions and getting to know people that I didn't know, because as much as I thought I knew a lot of people, you go to a parade in Salida, walk down the street during FIBARC, or even a parade in BV, and I was amazed at how many people lining the sidewalks that I didn't recognize or I didn't know. A lot of them knew me, but I didn't know them. And it was actually kind of frightening. And so it made me work all that much harder to get to know more people and get to know more people in the community. And then beginning in about January 2015, so almost 2 years before the election in November 2016, I started attending every county commission, every planning commission meeting, every meeting like that I possibly could. Every county commission work session, every county commission regular meeting, so I would be familiar with the issues, familiar with the processes and procedures that they were using. So, and my opponent at the time, hats off to him, he did the same thing. We were there pretty much almost 2 solid years at every possible meeting we could attend, so that whichever one of us got elected, we'd be fully prepared, or as prepared as we could be, because you're never fully prepared to take the seat and take the position. So that's different. I'm not a full-time candidate now. I'm doing both. I'm both a commissioner and a candidate, and I've told several people the best thing I can do as a viable candidate is to be the best possible county commissioner I can be. If I slack off at being a commissioner in order to campaign, or if I campaign at the expense of my commissioner duties, then that's not serving anybody well. It's not serving the citizens well, it's not serving me well, and it's not serving my candidacy well. So that's really the big thing about what's different. And I'm an incumbent. When I ran in 2016, it was going to be an open seat. And I think having the incumbency is both an asset and a liability. So it makes you something of a target to people, but it's also a record that I'm proud of. There's not really any decisions or any votes that I've cast that I would take back. In fact, none that I can think of, because I study the issues, I study the topics, and I think about things in terms of my principles and the Constitution. And if I'm not comfortable with a vote I make, then I'd ask for more time or something. But those are the big differences.
Well, Keith, I've really appreciated your time here. I know that you've got a lot of work on your plate right now, and I'm really grateful for your time and your service. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Erica. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you all who have watched or listened. You know, you can hit the pause button. A little bit late to say it now, but you can hit the pause button, you can rewind, you can do all that stuff. This is video. It's at your control. Thank you much, and I appreciate your vote in a few weeks.